Hi, Jason Belk again. I learned a ton from all those sessions. I hope you did as well. Now we have a time of live interactive Q&A with our speakers. We went through our sessions one by one, covering all the way from DevNet to some new productivity tools from Marko. And so I'd like to start off our Q&A actually by asking myself as a speaker, what lab should I go through after I go through that Learn NSO the Easy Way lab? And I'll answer my own question by saying we have a learning track called Get Started with NSO that's linked on our Dev Center, as well as you can find that on DevNet as well. So that Get Started with NSO learning track will allow you to follow along and see, okay, now that I've started with one lab, what are the sequential labs? We have Yang labs, we have Ansible with NSO labs, we have a ton of different RESTconf different labs out there for you to learn what's going on. So now I'll go ahead and start the Q&A with some of the other speakers. So first, Viktor, what are some practical examples where XPath would save me time in NSO?
So there are quite a few cases, right, where you can do it much quicker in XPath than you can in Python or Java. The most obvious example is you use must expressions instead of validations, right? So you can just set conditions that must always be true when you make the service or some other data. That's really helpful.
Okay, great. One follow-up question that what might be some scenarios where XPath might hurt my performance, where I might make things slower unintentionally by using XPath.
The most common error people do is that they omit keys. So XPath allows you to omit keys in a path. You don't need to list every key that's available. And what happens is that NSO will search every part of the tree instead. So the best thing to do, make sure to always specify every key. If possible, that's perhaps the most common mistake we see people make.
Okay, great. Marko, great presentation on device automation. What type of devices can you manage with this device automation framework you're using?
Probably one of the first questions people ask when they see it. So there's really only one place in the automaton where the device type, or rather the NED ID you configure, matters. And that's when we configure the management credentials, as you've seen in the demo. So today, on September 15th, 2021, we have support for the major Cisco platforms, iOS, iOS XR, NXOS, and ASA. As well as Juniper Junos, Nokia SRS, and Huawei VRP. If your platforms or if your devices use a different NED, the instructions on how to add support are included in the repository, in the README. It's very simple. You just add the configuration to one single template. So if you do that, please open a merge request on the public repo. We'll be glad to accept contributions.
Thank you. Hank, what is the value of using PiETS if I'm using netconf Yang to connect to my devices rather than some other non-CLI API?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the most common use cases for PiACS is to easily parse through the CLI show output as they go through. But with newer protocols like netconf and RESTconf that provide kind of pre-populated or pre-parsed data, those features don't make as much sense. However, there's a lot more in PiACS than just those parsers and models. There's the whole test case engine. So if you're trying to build a robust test with multiple steps and you want to gather logs about the results of those tests, PiACS offers that. There's also the triggers and verifications that are built into the library as well. Suppose you want to write a test and you want to make sure that your routing protocol works the same before and after an interface goes up and down. Well, there's a trigger automatically built into PiACS where you can just say, do that, and you don't have to write the code to make those actions happen. And then the verifications can do the before and after checks. And so while we talk a lot about PiACS with those parsers and models, there's a lot more in the library that are useful even outside of, or when you move into something like netconf or RESTconf.
Awesome. Thank you. Stuart, how can I get access to this NSO DevNet sandbox?
Oh, great question. Jason. So if you head over to developer.cisco.com or go to the new NSO Dev Center, we have direct links there which will take you over to the NSO or the DevNet sandboxes. And in there, you can find the DevNet sandboxes, the one that we mentioned throughout all of the sessions today, which is the always on and the reservable. To get access to these, it's completely free. So, I mean, that's 2 thumbs up straight away. You'll just need to sign up, and you can sign into DevNet using your Cisco ID or any of your social media accounts, and you can get playing with the sandboxes straight away.
And I know people often ask, so I just want to ask, how long did it take you to grow that beard?
This is about 15 years now. Yeah, about 15 years. So I'm getting up there to sort of like, Gandalf status. I'm kind of hoping you're going to join me up there soon.
I'm just getting started. This is definitely not 15 years. Well, Marko, one other question. How often does this device automation monitor the connectivity to out-of-band management endpoints?
Yeah, so the default monitoring period is 5 minutes, but that's configurable, right? You can configure that in the global settings. The devices are polled concurrently, though, so it doesn't matter if you have a single device or hundreds of devices. It's going to poll them in parallel and ensure that it completes the cycle in the configured period. That changes, though, if the management endpoints are unreachable, because then it's going to obviously time out first and then do a couple of retries. So in the best case scenario, it's going to be very fast. In the worst case scenario, it's going to take some time to figure out that it's really unreachable. But the connectivity test itself is basically an attempt to establish an SSH connection to the device using the configured credentials. So that's what we use to verify.
Makes sense. And finally, one last question to Hank. Are there any requirements if I'm going to use PiETS in my service to install anything extra?
Yeah, so PiETS is a Python library. So when you're writing your service and you're building that out, you just need to make sure that the Python environment or virtual environment that NSO uses to start up that Python VM has PiETS installed. And it can be installed straight from PyPy with a pip install PiETS as it goes through. If you're using other Python libraries during some of your tests, you may need to install those as well. But the only requirement for PiETS itself is to have the PiETS libraries installed.
Makes sense. Awesome. Well, I think with that, we can transition to a short break before we start our expert town hall. And the expert town hall is going to be hosted by Viktor, and Viktor's going to bring in a bunch of other really neat experts. So this is not just the speakers we're talking about. We're now bringing in the rest of our products, services, and other people who are working with NSO.